Hello, everyone. So we are on our video 2 for the endocrine system. Um, the endocrine module, or our weekly module, can be seen here. Okay, our lab 3, and I want you, before we go any further, to follow step number 7, which is to read your lab manual, exercise 27, page 402 and 404 if you haven't done that yet, and then print or fill out a digital copy to fill out as we watch this video. So if you haven't done that, do that now and then come on back. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at in our lab manual, we're going to be referencing the tables. So we have table 27.1, which is on page 399, and we're going to move on from there. So table 27.1 has an A, B, and then table 27.2, 3, and 4. We're going to keep moving through. And so if you don't have your lab manual out, grab that now and then come on back. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the microscopic anatomy of some of our endocrine glands. So page 402 starts our activity 2. This is where we're going to examine the microscopic structure of some of these endocrine glands. So we're going to kind of pop back and forth between these charts if you want to bookmark that or sticky note that for yourself, and take a minute to do that, and then come on back to activity 2 on page 402 when you're ready. So this is figure 27.3 from page 403. That's your activity 2 in your lab manual. And we're going to be looking at the different histology of these. So the microscopic anatomy of these. The thyroid gland, we're going to look at the parathyroid gland, your pancreas, and the adrenal glands, and the posterior and anterior pituitary. Remember that these are both one in the same part of the pituitary gland, but we have our anterior portion and our posterior portion, which are responsible for different hormones. So we're going to look at those up close now. So first up is our thyroid gland. And the thyroid gland, if you remember, is located in the anterior neck. It does have 2 lobes, and it is separated by the isthmus, which is the central mass. Those 2 lobes are separated. In the thyroid gland, we're seeing the production of the T3, T4 hormones. So our thyroid glands have what we call these follicles, and the follicles are going to be colloid filled. Okay, the follicles are going to store the T3, T4 in what we call thyroglobulin, and we're going to slowly secrete over time. Okay, T3, T4 are responsible for metabolism in the body and lots of maintenance. So most of the body is going to depend upon some sort of thyroid stimulation, and it's going to be regulated by that TSH release from the anterior pituitary, which will trigger the thyroid gland to then produce that T3, T4, store it, and slowly secrete it over time. The thyroid gland doesn't just secrete at one period of time or another. The thyroid gland is sort of slowly on its own schedule, releasing all of the time, just small amounts to keep the body at a level that's steady and sturdy. Now, when you look around that colloid-filled follicular area on the thyroid gland, okay, you're going to see this simple cuboidal epithelium surrounding. Okay, these are called the C cells or the parafollicular cells, and the parafollicular cells or the C cells are responsible for producing calcitonin. Calcitonin is a calcium regulator in the body. It's going to be the antagonist or oppose the PTH or the parathyroid hormone. We'll talk about the parathyroid gland in a few minutes. And it is going to help to regulate the levels of blood calcium, reducing the calcium levels in the body. Okay, we're going to start reducing our osteoclastic activity. If you remember that those are helping to break down bone cells, etc. Okay, so we're going to reduce the calcium levels in the body and oppose the PTH or the parathyroid hormone here. Now we're going to come back to the parathyroid gland in a minute. But I do want you to see that this is that thyroid gland. You can see the differentiation between the thyroid and the parathyroid gland, which is embedded into that posterior surface of the thyroid gland. And even from far away, this is only 40 times magnification, you can see those colloid-filled follicles and see that they are surrounded by a different orientation of those cells, or those C cells, parafollicular cells. When we talk about any of the glands, we do have to remember that we need to talk about the disorders that go along with them and what it means to have the hormone levels be unstable that are coming out of those glands. Okay, so the endocrine system is all about this hormone release and this pathway. What happens when we have a disruption to that pathway? Now, the thyroid gland, we have our T3, T4 thyroid hormones controlling that basal metabolic rate, that metabolism in the body. And again, we have the connection from the anterior pituitary, the release of the thyroid stimulating hormone to stimulate the thyroid gland to produce and secrete that T3, T4. Okay. We also have the calcitonin being produced by the parafollicular cells, and that is going to regulate the calcium levels in the body. Now, any hypersecretion, so that's oversecretion or excess in secretion in the thyroid gland, we're going to be seeing abnormalities in the body. So the big ones here are going to be Graves' disease. Graves' disease is an autoimmune disease, and the immune system is going to attack the thyroid gland. What ends up happening is that antibodies are produced that act like that thyroid stimulating hormone, and the thyroid stimulating hormone is going to be released from that anterior pituitary, over secreting the thyroid hormones. When you have Graves' disease, you're seeing weight loss, you're seeing an increase in heart rate, an increase in blood pressure, among other things. But one of the more memorable clinical presentations that we're going to see is bulging eyes. Okay, so the eyes kind of looking like the Boston Terrier eyes, right? Everyone knows this sort of bulging eyes. When you have that, that is an indication of Graves' disease. Also with the thyroid glands, we're going to see hypersecretion causing inflammation of the thyroid gland, so thyroiditis. And if you have inflammation of the thyroid gland, you can have an excess of the thyroid hormones being released. Okay, and adenomas. Adenomas are going to be nodules that are found in the gland. And those areas of nodules in the gland are going to upset the chemical balance by over-secreting the T3, T4. Okay, so that's your hypersecretion, your over-secretion. We also can have hyposecretion. Okay, so other things can come from an under-secretion of the thyroid hormone. Now, this has its own sort of group of problems, but typically what ends up happening is it's a pituitary gland secretion issue with the TSH, or that thyroid stimulating hormone, that's going to produce a hyposecretion of the T3, T4. So we're going to move on to the parathyroid gland. We're going to pop back to this slide really quick, where we can see the parathyroid gland that's embedded into the thyroid, right? And you can see the follicles, you can see the parathyroid gland itself. Remember that they're paired on either side, left and right, on that posterior thyroid. Now, when you look more up close, okay, let me just move back a slide a little bit, okay? Thyroid gland, your parathyroid gland here. And if we go up close, again, you're going to see these follicles a little bit better from the thyroid, and this parathyroid gland, you can see how it is embedded into this tissue here. When we start looking up close, we can see our start to see our specific cells of the parathyroid gland. So I'm going to pop over to the other slide here. This is the slide from your lab manual, so it should be familiar to you. If we're looking at the parathyroid gland, we're looking at our parathyroid cells and these little bulbous cells here that are darker in color, and our oxyphil cells that are sort of in between the parathyroid cells. What's interesting here is that we'll talk about the parathyroid cells in just a second, but these oxyphil cells, we don't actually know what the purpose of these oxyphil cells is. So we can recognize them, that they are in the parathyroid gland, but we don't know the purpose of them yet. The parathyroid cells are going to be secreting your PTH, or your parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone is going to oppose the calcitonin from the C cells, or those parafollicular cells, from the thyroid gland. So now we're seeing an increase in calcium levels in the body. And this hyperparathyroidism is when you have too much, you have an increase, too high levels of calcium in the body. And you can end up with something like kidney stones. Okay. Now, if we look at it just in a little bit of a different way here, we can see these oxyphil cells here, okay, scattered around in our parathyroid gland, and they do seem a bit larger. It's interesting that we don't know what they are. And then these are labeled the chief cells, and the chief cells are your parathyroid cells. Up next is our pancreas. Remember that our pancreas is an endocrine and an exocrine organ. It is part of our digestive tract as well. So we are going to see how, when we're looking at the endocrine pancreas, we are going to see that exocrine pancreas where we are seeing the digestive juices as well. This is your picture from your lab manual here. Now, the endocrine pancreas is going to be this pancreatic islet, okay? And this pancreatic islet, or this endocrine islet of the pancreas, will be surrounded by that exocrine tissue. Now you can see the difference. So when you're looking, not quite this up close, but when we zoom out a little bit, you can also see those islets sort of scattered around. Now the pancreatic and Sener cells are going to be the exocrine area. Okay, this islet is going to be the endocrine area, and this islet is going to be responsible for producing glucagon and insulin. Okay, so this is where we have our diabetes sort of disorders coming into play here. Okay, if you want to take a break from the video in just a minute when we're done talking about the pancreas and go watch the diabetes video and start on that, so you get a little break from the video, feel free to do that. It'd be a good place to put it in. But diabetes is one of the disorders from the pancreas, and it is where you have your beta cells that are insulin producing cells. And if we have an intolerance to insulin, where the body cannot properly use it, or if we have a supply issue with our insulin, okay, over or under production of our insulin, then that's when we're seeing diabetes. You can also have these small tumors in the pancreas that are called insulinomas, and those tumors can cause an over-secretion of insulin, or overproduction and then over-secretion of insulin in the pancreas. So if we zoom out a little bit from the lab manual and we look at the pancreas in cross-section, okay, one of the things that we would be looking at in the slides in the lab is where you're zooming in slowly. So I really like to sort of pull back sometimes and then zoom on in again. Now you can see these pancreatic islets here. They do look different than the other tissue around, okay, that Sener tissue, which is just going to sit around that endocrine material. That is your exocrine material. And you're going to have these ducts and these pathways for your exocrine secretion into the digestive tract. Okay, the pancreatic juice helps with digestion, and the pancreatic islets are producing the insulin and the glucagon. So if we look just up close again here, we can see these pancreatic islets and this Sener tissue surrounding. And if we zoom back out a little bit again, back to where we were, sometimes they look a little bit different. So these pancreatic islets and these ducts will be sort of sitting right in between all of that Sener tissue, all of that exocrine material. So again, if you'd like a pause from this video, we're going to continue on in another little segment. If you'd like a pause from this video, take a break, go watch your diabetes video, maybe do your lab experiment activity on diabetes while the pancreas and the pancreatic cells are fresh in your mind, and come on back for video number 2.